Hi everybody, Richard Trumans here again, Artificial Lawyer TV. Today we're doing another product walkthrough. This time we're looking at Docgility. Hey Jim, how you doing?
Hey, Rich, great to see you again.
Jim, please take it away. I will come back at the end.
Thank you, Richard. So today we're actually announcing our newest product offering, which is Docgility Virtual Collaboration Network. It basically allows you to digitally interconnect with trading partners. And what we're talking about is basically the contracting process. One of the things we actually did recently is we actually kind of reissued our tagline, which is kind of the fastest contracting period. Okay, it kind of summarizes exactly what we actually do in the contracting space. And it basically speeds up the entire contracting process across the board. So maybe that what makes sense is let's kind of go into a quick product demonstration of what our current product is because it's changed substantially since we last seen it. And we can walk through the entire contracting process from the intake of contracts to the review process to the collaboration, as well as the negotiation process, and finally the signature piece. So, as a typical example, let's say you receive a contract from a third party, some type of contract. This is actually a publicly available contract based on SEC. And when you ingest it, what you actually see is basically inside of the Docgility system. Once it processes within Docgility, we support both PDF as well as Word documents. Once it actually processes, a lot of the AI that we actually have built internally actually goes through each paragraph and determines each of the topics, that's relevant legal topics within each paragraph. The reason why that's actually useful is that once you actually get the contract within Docgility, you can actually just go and navigate it intelligently. So you can actually, that's already indexed in terms of the 30 most commonly searched for terms across all different types of contracts. And for example, you can actually look at it and go, well, what is the governing law associated with this contract? You can actually go and say it's the state of Maryland, or maybe you look at the liability clauses in the contract. Another very useful use case for this is basically when you actually try to navigate maybe a 200-page contract. A lot of times, what you're really looking for is being able to make sure that you understand all of the risks associated with contract. And everyone who's actually signing a contract really cares about things like the financial risk associated with contract. So when you look at the payment section, you can actually go and zoom in on this topic. And what this effectively means is it gives you a more definition of what a payment or financial terms associated with the contract is. And then what that allows you to do is basically zoom in on this contract, isolating that specific topic. Because, for example, you can actually look at and basically see clauses in the contract that basically are embedded in other clauses that basically indicate things like who actually has the ability to approve change orders, or maybe something in terms of a clause that says with current funds and compensation, Article 6. These are the type of things that actually are embedded heavily in the contract and allows you to quickly surface this information so you can actually quickly navigate it. Okay. So as an example, you can actually just go through and basically go through each of the topics and be able to isolate each one. One of the things that we actually emphasize is that when you're talking about AI, it's very important to actually have an application that instantly and quickly surfaces why AI is useful for someone. And being able to navigate a long contract is a very, very important use case. Now, if you actually look at our interface, one of the things that's fundamentally different from practically all the applications out there is that this interface is geared specifically for the comparison of legal text. So if you actually look at you have these two side-by-side panels, and if you go on the upper right, you can actually go and increase the number of panels that you can see. And in each of those panels, you can actually store different types of documents. So as a result, if you choose to, and typically when you're actually reviewing a contract, you actually want to compare it against other things in your repository. So for example, maybe you might want to open maybe you have a contract template. Maybe this is your version of the contract template. Or a very useful functionality is actually opening up a playbook. So a playbook is an incredibly useful way to basically be able to, let me just open this up again. So a playbook is actually a very useful way for you to actually encapsulate the best practices within an organization. So for example, if you actually have a specific playbook here, you might have some termination language, and termination language might actually give you some guidelines as well as some standard termination text. Here's some other text, maybe an indemnification section. And this is actually a very good way for a user to create a playbook and be able to share it with other members of the organization that actually have access to the Docgility application so they can share these best practices across the board. And we work with a number of the consulting companies, and they do a lot of work in basically encapsulating kind of the institutional knowledge associated with how best to negotiate these contracts into these playbooks. And these playbooks can be structured in a whole range of ways. Another way that we actually want to, and one of the things we actually want to talk a little about and use the last panel for, is talk about a little bit about our advanced functionalities. Okay, so one of the things we actually support out of the box is the ability to support different type of language contracts. So one of the things we actually have here on the right side is a contract in I think Chinese or so. And in this contract itself, as long as you're able to type those characters, you actually can do red lines within that character set as well. In fact, if you actually go under the profile, you can actually specify the different types of language sets we actually have, and you can actually change it so that it's actually everything within the application itself is all in that specific language. The reason why this is important is that you were talking about, when you're talking about Docgility, it's one product with a whole range of playbooks that can actually be shared across an entire organization, okay, regardless of whether contracts are actually in English or Italian or French or Chinese, etc. You can actually have the entire organization be able to run the same application and be able to share best practices across the board. So that's actually out of the box. It's internationalized. It actually supports thousands of customers across the board. And this whole application actually installs in maybe one afternoon or so. So it doesn't take very long to actually install this thing. Now, another aspect of what, and I'm going to just glance over this, is basically our integrations to the LLM systems. So here's a great example of basically saying, let's say we have an integration that you actually configure to an OpenAI integration. And in the specific configuration, you actually have a number of prompts actually set up. So as an example, let's say you're looking at the contract you're reviewing and you're looking at specific liability language. And you're reading through this, and maybe there's a specific paragraph in there that actually is not, is maybe problematic. What you want this integration to be able to do is, and it's very, very much configurable, is taking the context of what you're looking at. Can the LLM actually recommend different options? And in this case, you actually have very simple prompts. For example, formalize the legal language and make the terms better for a counterparty or the overall risk or things along those lines. But the power behind this allows you to basically take in the information from the playbook and maybe your template as well to improve the intelligence of the prompt so that it's context specific. Okay. And we can actually talk more about our integration in LLM a little later. But anyway, in another example, maybe you actually might want to pull up another document that says maybe something else you actually reviewed that's similar to the contract on the left side. Okay. So a great way to actually use this application is basically being able to do these syncs. So if you turn these on, it tells these panels to listen for topic changes on the other panels. So as an example, you can actually go turn this topic to basically maybe termination language. And all of a sudden across the board, you actually have comparison of like legal language across all of these document sets. Okay. So you can actually see what what this particular contract you're reviewing, what the language is, maybe what's actually in your exact of the template you actually use for your own contracts, maybe some standard termination language, and maybe something else here that basically represents a contract that you previously executed with this customer. So as an example, let's say you actually want to go and make a red line. Here you can basically copy maybe standard termination text. You can actually go and paste it in, and then maybe say replace this specific sentence. And that's really all that's necessary to actually create a red line with Docgility. Okay. Now notice this actually is an application that actually sits on the web, but we're completely interoperable with Microsoft Word. So one of the things we actually also allow you to do is being able to basically download the redline docx, which takes the original contract and basically inserts the red line in it as well. Okay. And that allows you to basically completely interoperate with Microsoft Word. But here, one of the reasons why I actually did not implement it as a Word add-on is because this gives you the entire context of other documents you actually want to compare for, AI interfaces that you actually want to incorporate to see what other information you want to pull in from, as well as your own templates. okay, whatever you actually like on the other side. In addition, this interface allows you to basically do edits across different documents. So for example, let's say you actually want to see all, and then basically instances of liability. Okay. And here you actually have your entire set of all the sync documents being able to search through these terms. And you can edit these documents concurrently across a whole range of contracts at the same time. A very, very useful feature. So anyway, so that's actually how what we actually kind of demonstrate is basically how you actually do the contract review process, right? The ability to actually zoom in on specific terms that you actually want to look for, being able to compare it against other templates, being able to use AI to actually go recommend changes to that specific contract. And what we're going to also do is then talk a little bit about the collaboration piece. Okay. So one of the fundamental things that we are very different from kind of traditional CLM systems is that we support this concept of document concurrency. Okay. Which we're actually absolutely convinced is one of the most fundamental things that is necessary for any contract management system where your priority is contract cycle time. Okay. To make the contract be able to get to the point of execution as quickly as possible. So one of the things we actually do is when we realize that even if you actually have one user and you enable them with the best AI system, the most intelligent AI system, it will speed up that contracting process for that one user. But before this contract can actually be executed, it really requires a village of people. For example, finance, cooperation, operations, different groups. Maybe you have outside counsel if you're actually talking about a more complex contract. So here, what we're actually going to demonstrate is basically, and you actually see multiple tabs in our environment, is different personas acting on the same contract. So as an example, let's say we turn on collaboration. And when we turn on collaboration, we actually have a user, maybe X at maybe a finance person or such. And this person actually is then added as a collaborator to this specific contract. And in the second tab, what we actually have is that specific user logged in. So when you actually you start the contracting process and you basically add someone else as a collaborator, they can then open up the contract as a collaborator. And then they can actually go and look through this. And perhaps Sally's a finance person. She might look for maybe termination clauses. Maybe she actually might want to look at maybe payment terms, period, etc. Okay, depending on what persona you actually are looking for. And then as Sally is actually looking at a specific contract, she can actually recommend changes. So as an example, maybe she sees a comment here. She goes, here, this might be wrong or something like this, and add a comment. And then basically say, maybe I want to edit a specific sentence and change it and maybe mark this as high risk. Okay. So these are things that you can actually do as somebody who's as a collaborator. Now, if you go look back at the original view, all of this information is actually synchronous. So you can actually have multiple people acting on the same contract at the same time. Okay. This is actually in direct contrast to how a lot of CLM systems actually designed, where you basically have one person being able to make edits to a contract at the same time at any one time because it's a document versioning system. Here, what we're talking about is being able to support document concurrency, so as many people as necessary can actually be acting on the same contract at the same time. So as long as you're actually able to open it, then you can actually make changes to it. Now you can actually maybe respond to these comments. It goes, okay, or something along those lines, and to respond to Sally's concerns. And then basically being able to review this and go, okay, this language actually looks okay, so I'm going to approve it. And that allows you to approve it as the owner of the contract. So this allows you to actually have multiple people working on the same contract at the same time. Now, at this point, one of the things that when we actually talked about 6 months ago, what we recommend users do is basically go and download the Redline docx. And basically, once that download is done, it creates all the red lines within the Word document. That Word document can then be sent to the counterparty. Okay? But we've never really been happy with that answer. Okay. And here's why. You're still going to have to deal with versioning problems when you actually wait on the counterparty because they're going to make their edits. They're going to approve some changes. They send the document in. They might actually have added language that you didn't expect, that they did not turn on red line for. A whole range of problems actually happen when you actually have that. So today, what we're doing is we're introducing this concept of the Doc virtual collaboration network. So basically, seamlessly digitally interconnect with the trading partners. This is actually one of the most fundamental concepts to how we are speeding up the contracting process from the inception all the way to the point of execution. And here's how it works. Let's say we actually imagine a scenario. We have 4 companies being able to work on a contract together. So in this scenario, what I've shown you today is basically company A. Okay, you actually have Albert and Sally working on the contract. You can actually have multiple collaborators. You can actually have multiple owners all working in the same contract. And what you're trying to do is negotiate a contract with company C. And because it's actually a very complicated contract, you actually might also want legal representation from law firm B or law firm D for company C, etc. So the way that Docgility Virtual Collaboration Network allows you to do this is when you actually first initialize your instances to the Docgility Virtual Network, it authenticates that company and then effectively sets up a secure connection between each of the companies and the Docgility Virtual Network. And what that allows you to do is when you actually are negotiating a contract between each of these different parties, you can actually establish these secure digital pipes between each of these entities. Okay, so that at any time you can actually go and have a synchronous peer-to-peer collaboration and negotiation API across each of these companies. Okay, this allows you to basically have one company have the data and originate the contract and invite others to actually be able to do comments as well as suggest red line edits or things along those lines. What we're solving is a very, very, very fundamental problem. How do you actually collaborate and negotiate with outside parties in a secure way and maintain data security? Because in each of these instances, each of these companies has a completely different data set. And in this case, a different Docgility instance. So let's go a little bit further into this, and I'm going to show you a little bit about our technology environment. Okay, so everything we actually install within Docgility installs easily into a Kubernetes environment. Kubernetes actually is a technology for cloud that allows you to basically deploy things through Helm scripts so that it automatically describes all of the components that you actually need to install. So that's why it's actually no longer necessary to actually take months to do installation. It literally takes a few hours to actually do this. So here you actually have four different Kubernetes environments to represent A company, B law group, C company, and D law group. And each one actually houses its own data sets. So here, what we're actually going to demonstrate is how we actually have all of these environments actually working together. So let's go back to Albert's view. So Albert has already basically collected a whole range of comments as well as potential red lines from each of the collaborators within the company. He's approved other things, and now it's actually ready for the negotiation phase. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to add a collaborator to this, and I'm going to add a collaborator that's my outside legal firm. So I add this, and as a result of that, if I go to this other tab here, this is a instance of Docgility that's from the law firm itself. Okay, this is my outside counsel. If I go and open a VCN document, as soon as that user actually allows me to have access, I see that I can actually go and open this contract as if I'm on the same instance. It requests this access through this peer-to-peer API that allows me to then do collaboration with a specific user in real time. So here, maybe I actually make some comments. I say, okay, outside counsel comment, this is risky, or something along those lines. And then make a comment. Maybe I would like to suggest a change, maybe delete a specific sentence or something along those lines. And this actually happens exactly as if it's actually on the same instance. It actually looks exactly the same. That's by design. If you go back to the original view, again, everything is synchronous at this point. Maybe I actually want to have the outside counsel be able to do red lines directly. I can actually promote it to an owner. Or in this case, maybe I just look at their comments and basically approve them. Okay. And that then becomes something that's part of the final contract. Okay. Now we haven't included the counterparty yet. So let's do that now. So you can actually turn on negotiation, which then allows counterparties to actually be able to look at this and then also be able to actually add them as a negotiator. So in this case, I'm going to add the counterparty. And this is actually the person who's actually trying to sell me this product. And I can then if I go look at this tab, this is actually my counterparty's Docgility instance. And the counterparty can then open up the VCN document. Let me just do this again. The counsel as well. Okay, so let's go back to this view. Open up the VCN, and here I actually have access to this contract again. So when I open this, one of the things that's absolutely a critical piece to this is that when you're talking about collaborators versus negotiators, the counterparty, you do not want to be able to share comments between them. So in this instance, let's go back to the original view. Okay, if you actually look at this expanded view, what you basically see is these round dots, which actually is only for internal collaboration only. And then you have the square instances, which is actually then open for the counterparties to actually also access. So if you look at this, what you see is basically the internal comments are not accessible by the counterparty, but you actually have separate comments and then other document edits for the other user. So it effectively gives you a firewall between collaboration and negotiation processes. Now, there's one exception, which is basically when you try to create a red line and it's approved red line, that automatically gets propagated to the negotiation side. And the reason why that's important is that user can then basically react to this. So let's go back to that view. And here, what you see is I, as the counterparty, can only see the things that are relevant to me. Okay, so in this instance, I can only see the comments that are actually intended for the counterparties to actually be able to see, as well as the proposed document edits to the counterparty. So, for example, I can actually make a comment and say, "This is a negotiator. This is a counterparty comment," or something along those lines. I can add this, and that's only accessible from the counterparty as well as from the other side as well. Okay, so you can actually see that comment. Now, as this party, I can then react to this instance. But in this instance, I want to make sure that the negotiator is actually set up. So negotiation is actually set up as well. So here is the counterparty counsel. So this is actually someone I have invited as the counterparty to the specific contract, and they can actually also access the contract as well. So they can actually make a comment here, and then basically maybe they have appropriate access to be able to approve different document edits. Maybe they actually approve the specific language for these two things, and that seems like it's perfectly fine. And that allows you to basically say, let's see, does a round trip. And you see, basically, once you approve it from the counterparty standpoint, that change turns from blue to green, which indicates that the counterparty has also negotiated and approved this change. So this gives you a handshake between the originating party and the counterparty in terms of one. And then maybe there's other things, maybe there's something that's specific to the C Corp. They can actually then do the same changes as well. They can actually then approve it.
But just to wrap things up, just very, very, very briefly, and I know you wanted to talk a bit about CLM, but we'll have to do that separately. Just very briefly, if people do want to get this, how do they go about it?
Well, they can actually just check out our website. We actually publish a whole range of videos about how our product works. And they can actually also request the product documentation. One of the things we actually always stress is legal tech should not be that hard. So to kind of start using the system, it literally requires a half a day to install and then maybe a couple of days to actually just kind of walk you through the system. and then you can actually start experimenting with it.
Fantastic. And just very final point, just sort of technically, if they want to bring this into their system, how do they go about it?
If they actually work with an Azure environment or some type of cloud environment, we actually ship them a script as well as some credentials, and they can just basically install it pretty quickly to bring up a Kubernetes environment and then basically install it, and then they actually have access. They can also actually integrate this with their single sign-on system as well, so that once you actually configure it correctly, any user can actually has access to that application, can then be able to authenticate easily, and then instantly get logged into the application.
Well, look, Jim, as mentioned, there's an enormous amount going on, Docgility, and we could go for quite a while, but we've got to leave it there.
Thank you so much